discover the moment that changed my marriage and freed me from the interference of my toxic mother-in-law. I still remember the day everything turned inside me. It wasn't a movie scene, nor a beautiful moment, but it was the most real of my life. I was sitting in the living room, breastfeeding Hator, when I heard Alice's voice coming from the kitchen, telling the neighbor that her son had ruined his life by marrying me. She spoke with such certainty, as if I were a mistake, a burden, a threat. And the worst part is, it wasn't the first time. For months, she had been undermining everything around me, my decisions, my confidence, my peace. But that day, I could no longer pretend it didn't hurt. I looked at my baby, saw Matthias playing in the corner, and thought it was for them that I needed to change. That I couldn't let my children grow up watching their mother remain silent in the face of humiliation. That was when I understood. Silence is also a choice, and I no longer wanted to choose to diminish myself. My name is Sylvia, I'm 35, and 6 months ago I married Gustavo, the man who showed me it was still possible to love after loss. I was married before, to Renato, Matthias's father, who passed away a few years ago. I thought I'd never find someone who looked at me with the same affection, but Gustavo welcomed me with respect and patience. But love, no matter how strong, isn't enough when there's interference. From the beginning, his mother, Alice, made it clear that she didn't accept our marriage. She said he should have stayed with Bianca, his ex. She said this behind my back, and sometimes even to my face, with that tone disguised as opinion. At first, I tried to understand, thinking it was maternal jealousy, but over time, I realized it was something deeper. Her need to control everything and everyone, including our home. At first, I tried hard to be understanding. I told myself she just needed time, that she would get to know me better and accept me. I made coffee, invited her to lunch, tried to talk. But nothing seemed enough. She always found a reason to criticize. She said I didn't take care of the house properly, that Matthias was spoiled, that Hader cried too much because I didn't know how to be a mother. I smiled to avoid causing a fuss, but every word she said stuck in my throat. I began to feel like a guest in my own life. And the worst part was, by trying so hard to maintain the peace, I was losing my voice. It got to a point where I no longer recognized who I was. It felt like I was living to please someone who would never be satisfied. Gustavo saw what was happening and tried to set boundaries, but it was difficult for him. Alice had always been dominant, and he'd grown up learning not to contradict her. I saw the conflict in his eyes. I wanted to defend myself, but I also wanted to avoid hurting his mother, and it broke my heart. I loved that man, and I knew he loved me too, but I felt like our relationship was being suffocated by something that wasn't ours. And it was precisely that day, as I listened to yet another criticism coming from the kitchen, that something inside me awakened. I remembered the woman I was before all this, the strength I needed to summon when I lost Renato, the courage I found to raise Matthias alone. And I realized I was forgetting that woman. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself in the name of a peace that never existed. I stood up with my heart racing. I went to the kitchen and found Alice stirring the pots and pans as if nothing had happened. I was shaking, but not with fear. It was with determination. I looked at her and calmly told her that I would no longer accept that kind of treatment in my home. I understood her pain, but I also felt my own. That my family was Gustavo, Matthias, and Hator, and that if she wanted to be a part of it, she would have to respect our boundaries. She laughed mockingly, saying I was excited over nothing, but I remained firm. It was the first time I didn't lower my head, and in that moment, even without shouts or an audience, something inside me shifted. I felt a strength I hadn't even known existed. After I said that, the silence that followed was heavy. I felt my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. But along with the fear came a different feeling. Relief. For the first time, I had said what needed to be said. Not angrily, but firmly. Alice was speechless for a few seconds, and I could tell she wasn't used to being contradicted. Gustavo arrived soon after, noticed the tense atmosphere, and tried to understand what had happened. I took a deep breath and told him what I'd said, holding nothing back. He didn't interrupt me, just looked at me with that mix of pride and concern. Deep down, I think he was tired too, but he never knew how to act. When I finished speaking, he held my hand and said he was on my side. It was the first time I felt like the two of us were truly together, as a team. The atmosphere grew strange over the next few days. Alice didn't show up for a while, which honestly was a relief. The house felt lighter. Even the air felt different. I started sleeping better, feeling less tense. But at the same time, there was a part of me that felt guilty. I'd been raised to believe that a good woman is one who endures, who gives in, who avoids conflict. And suddenly, I'd done the opposite. I started to wonder if I'd overreacted, if I'd been cruel. It was Gustavo who reminded me that setting boundaries isn't being cruel, it's respecting yourself. He said he admired me for doing what he himself hadn't had the courage to do before. Those words touched me deeply. I realized that when we assert ourselves, we also help others free themselves. Even with this new phase, I won't pretend everything was perfect. Alice tried to get closer, but she kept testing my limits. The difference is that now I wasn't so easily shaken. I learned to recognize provocations and not fall for them. If she said something to provoke me, I took a deep breath and responded only as necessary, without justifying myself. I understood that I didn't need to convince anyone of my worth, much less those who chose not to see it. I began to direct my energy toward the things that truly mattered: my marriage, my children, my peace. And it was in this process that I realized how much I had neglected myself in the last few months. I started taking care of myself again, doing little things that gave me pleasure, like reading at night or taking late afternoon walks with Matthias. Matthias, in fact, was one of the biggest reasons I changed. I could see it in his eyes when Alice disrespected me. He didn't say anything, but I knew he understood, and that hurt. I didn't want him to grow up thinking it was normal to see a woman being belittled. When he saw me facing the situation calmly and firmly, I saw a silent admiration in his eyes. That night, he hugged me and said, "Mom, you are brave." And I cried, because deep down that was what I needed to hear, that I was teaching my son something good, even through the pain. It was then that I understood it wasn't just about standing up to my mother-in-law. It was about breaking a cycle, about showing my children that love and respect must go hand in hand. Over time, even Gustavo began to speak out more. He began to set clearer boundaries, not only with his mother, but with everything that destabilized us. We started talking more, working through the little things together that had previously become a storm. Our marriage grew stronger because, for the first time, we were truly on the same side, without fear, without guilt. I learned that setting boundaries doesn't push away those who truly love us. It only pushes away those who feed on our weariness. Today, I look back and see how much that day was a turning point in my life. It was the moment I chose myself, my family, and the peace I deserved. After that day, I began to see everything differently. Not that the pain had disappeared, but I began to see life more clearly. I realized I'd spent so much time trying to please others that I'd forgotten to take care of myself. I'd become a woman who apologized for even existing, and that was incredibly difficult. So I began to rebuild myself little by little, with simple gestures. Waking up and having a coffee in peace, without fear of being judged. Speaking my mind, without mincing every word to avoid displeasing. I began to allow myself to make mistakes, to not carry so much guilt for everything. The most liberating thing was understanding that I didn't need Alice's approval to be a good wife or mother. I just needed to be true to myself. Gustavo noticed the change in me. He said I was different, lighter, and I was. The house felt different. Heitor slept better, Mateus laughed more, and even the atmosphere between Gustavo and me became lighter. We started making plans again, talking, without fear of bringing up topics that used to turn into arguments. I felt like we were reclaiming something that Alice's interference had almost destroyed, our home as a place of peace. Gustavo started setting firmer boundaries with her, and that made all the difference. He understood that protecting our marriage wasn't disrespecting his mother. It was simply establishing what was healthy. It was beautiful to see him grow too, as a man, as a father, as a husband. Still, there were setbacks. Alice tried to get closer with false gestures of affection, and sometimes I fell into the trap of believing things were getting better. But today, I know how to tell when something is genuine and when it's disguised manipulation. I've learned to observe more than react. Maturity for me came when I realized I no longer needed to prove anything. When she said something provocative, I simply cut her off. This irritated her, of course, but it also made her realize that her old control no longer worked. It was difficult, because part of me still wanted to be accepted, but another, stronger part knew that respect can't be begged for. It's earned with poise and composure. One of the moments that struck me most was when Matthias asked me if Grandma Alice would still come home. I said yes, but that things would be different now, that she would have to respect our way of life. He was silent for a while and then said, "Thank goodness, Mom. I didn't like it when she made you sad." That broke me inside, because no matter how hard I tried to hide it, he could see it. And I understood right then that when we allow ourselves to be disrespected, we unintentionally teach ourselves that it's normal. And I didn't want that for my children. My turning point wasn't just for me, it was for them. I wanted them to grow up knowing that love doesn't mix with submission, and that respect begins at home. Today I understand that my story with Alice was never just about mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. It was about boundaries, about identity, about learning to stand up for yourself without feeling guilty. I needed to reach my limit to discover my strength, and that's what I try to convey to other women going through something similar. We can love, forgive, understand, but we should never accept being erased. I learned that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's knowing who you are and not giving up on that, even if it hurts at first. Because with time, the pain fades, but dignity remains. As the months passed, things began to fall into place. Not magically, but with effort, patience, and a lot of boundaries. Gustavo and I made a deal. Anything involving his mother, we would decide together. This changed a lot. Alice realized she could no longer talk to him behind my back, that our decisions were joint. At first, she tried to force things, calling frequently and offering her opinion on everything. But Gustavo started to put the brakes on things, and I no longer had to be the villain, as she called it. He took a stand calmly but firmly. Seeing this made me incredibly proud, because it meant he, too, was freeing himself. And for the first time, I felt our family was being built the right way, with unity and respect. Even so, rebuilding my confidence wasn't easy. For a long time, I lived in fear of being misunderstood, of appearing ungrateful, of being seen as someone who had taken a child away from his mother. That weight still haunted me, but little. By little, I began to understand that it wasn't my fault. I couldn't bear the consequences of her choices alone. It was liberating to realize that I wasn't responsible for the frustrations of a woman who never resolved her own pain. I just wanted to live my life, take care of my family, and move on in peace. And that, I learned, isn't selfishness. It's self-love. Living with Alice became more distant, but curiously, more bearable. We started seeing each other at specific times, like birthdays and, important dates. I stopped forcing connections. I greeted each other, talked the basics, and went on with my life, without resentment, but with very clear boundaries. And that's when something unexpected happened. She began to change. Not completely, but noticeably. Perhaps she realized that the control she once exerted was no longer effective, or perhaps she grew tired. I never knew for sure. But the fact is that over time, the attacks diminished. Sometimes, the simple act of asserting oneself is what transforms the environment. Not because the other person changes, but because we stop allowing ourselves to be hurt. One of the most beautiful things I experienced after everything was seeing Gustavo become an even more present father. He began sharing daily tasks with me, caring for Hader with affection, and being a role model for Matthias. He said the strength I showed inspired him too. I never imagined love could grow so much after such a difficult time, but it did. We learned to truly listen to each other, to talk without fear, to respect each other's space. Today, when I look at him, I see a life partner, not just a husband, and I realize that the love that survives pain is the strongest there is. I also started sharing my story with other women in online groups and conversation circles. At first, I was embarrassed, afraid of appearing weak. But to my surprise, many of them were experiencing something similar. Different stories, but with the same pain, feeling small, in their own homes. And it was then that I realized the power of telling the truth. Speaking heals. And when we speak, other women feel less alone. I don't know if Alice will ever understand how much she hurt me, but I know that in a way, she made me stronger. I don't wish her harm. I just hope that each of us one day learns to live without needing to control others to feel whole. Today, looking back, I see how much I've grown. It wasn't quick, nor easy, nor painless. There were days when I thought about giving up, about shutting up again, about accepting the manipulation just to have momentary peace. But I resisted. I took a deep breath, a breath for myself, for my family, for my future. Heitor, Mateus, and Gustavo deserved a version of me that was whole, that didn't hide, that didn't diminish itself, and I deserve that too. The sense of freedom I feel now is priceless. It's something that goes beyond the absence of conflict. It's knowing that I can say no, that I can set limits, that I can live the way I choose. It's a peace I didn't even know existed, and that I've achieved day by day, paragraph by paragraph of my own life. My relationship with Alice is now functional. We don't seek unnecessary closeness, nor do we try to repair the past. I've learned that some wounds don't require complete reconciliation for life to move on. She remains a part of our lives, but with clear rules that protect us. What was once anxiety and fear has become security and clarity. I no longer need to justify myself or prove myself capable. When she tries to interfere, I simply enforce the boundaries we established. And surprisingly, this changed everything. She learned slowly that control was gone, and I learned that true strength lies not in defeating others, but in remaining whole, regardless of what others do. Gustavo and I grew up together. I saw in him a firm stance he hadn't had before, and this strengthened our marriage like I never imagined. Motherhood with Heitor and Mateus became easier, full of joy and confidence. I was able to teach my children, not with words, but with actions, that respect is a priority, that love doesn't mix with submission or fear, that asserting yourself politely and firmly is an act of courage, not rebellion. I see Matthias's look when he realizes his mother won't let herself be diminished, and I'm proud. I know he'll carry this lesson with him for the rest of his life, and it gives me a sense of victory that no online rant could replace. I still have difficult days. I remember episodes from the past and sometimes feel a weight, a mixture of anger and sadness. But today, unlike before, I know how to cope. I cry, I vent, but I find my bearings. I listen to myself. And most importantly, I keep moving forward. Because overcoming doesn't mean forgetting or erasing, it means learning to walk with the pain and, even so, keep going. I've become my own fortress, and looking forward, I see that every seemingly impossible challenge, every humiliation, every criticism was actually training for the life I deserve to live, a life of balance, love, and respect. That's what I try to convey to those who read my story. Nothing is more powerful than standing up for yourself. If I could give advice to anyone going through something similar, I would say, your voice matters, your limits matter, and your peace is worth more than anyone's approval. It's not easy, and no one can guarantee it will be easy. But the freedom to live the way you choose is priceless. I got up, stood up in the face of my pain, and with the help of those who truly love me, rebuilt my home and my life. Today I feel whole, strong, and prepared for anything. And that, as simple as it may seem, is a huge victory. That's why I share my story, to show that it's possible, even when all seems lost, that it's possible to bounce back and find peace within yourself.